Duchamp, though. Do freaking urinal champ. The level of cultural relativist inanity about this is almost physically painful. When I first heard about this story, first heard about this specific thing I'm going to be talking about here, it just it encompassed so much to me as somebody who thinks I'm an artist. It's something that I do. It's something that has I've had questions about what is art, what does it mean when I do these things, and my whole answer to that is like, what comma is art? Like essentially, to me, when you do something artistic, it's pretty much when you're doing it for just the what reason for it, that question for it. You're not doing it to serve a direct, simple purpose. It's not a some direct functional purpose of what you're creating. I'm just trying to depict this to you, this actual thing that exists in reality to you. I'm trying to create this actual thing that functions in this way to you. It's like, no, okay, this functions in a certain way, then I'm adding something to it. Oh, this thing exists in reality, but I'm adding a feeling or reason of why I think this thing exists and why you should like this thing. That extra part, whenever we have the time to sit down and think, what? And then we can try to depict that what, or try to depict the answer from that what versus just doing the things that need to be done. To me, that is what art is. But this thing that I'm talking about here, it was this short clip of mad of it was in Afghanistan before, of course, the Kabul capitulation and things like that. They were just showing, it was like a BBC clip, and they were showing some women and men in the classroom. This is Afghani women and men, and there's a woman of European ethnicity, I guess from the West, and she's teaching them about Marcel Duchamp, and she's showing them the urinal, and that whole scene in there. There's going to be some visuals. You can imagine some red curtains, so it's kind of dark. I think they're watching it on. I don't think it's a projector. I don't think they went there to project. And this is part of the reason for these things. The amount of money spent in Afghanistan to do some of these things. There was trillions spent. Yes, it's completely accurate to be up in arms about all the arms and weapons and things like that that were left, the military materiel that was left. But then it was trillions of dollars. Most of the trillions of dollars went to things like these social programs that we're doing, these outreach things, these other things within the community, this civilization building type of activities that they're doing. And that is the point of this. I think this comes from a gross misunderstanding of any civilization, the one that people live in and the one they're trying to unburden. This situation, the one the people in the West live in and the ones they're trying to unburden supposedly and save and raise out that noblesse oblige type of thing now. It's some sort of, it's like neo-noblesse oblige, where it's not necessarily going to colonize you with our, for resources, but because we're going to colonize you with our resources, our social resources, our social justice resources. There's something in there. I might think about that idea later. Let me know what you think about this form of cultural colonialism that's going on. But art is the language of life. That is part of what I've been doing on some things. Try to talk about some things mostly related to art. Art is the language of life, and then perception matters also what is considered to be artistic. And that is something that, especially with this Duchamp urinal, that actually affected society in a certain way. Like civilizations develop to levels where the urinal is considered artistic by some. The urinal itself doesn't civilize the people who see the urinal. Does that make sense to y'all? That's what I'm trying to say. Like Western civilization, France, the area, even when Duchamp eventually came out, and I'll probably just read some background on what came around him actually getting that urinal out there. Society was not ready. Well, no, he's not ready. He wasn't ready. But they technically were ready, but they were at that precipice. But you can't just push somebody to that point. You presenting that is not going to get the people to that point before they're ready, somewhere around that point, to actually accept that concept. So dropping bombs or projecting urinals will not change what culture is. But due to the perception, we think, okay, the bombs is horrible. But then if we go in there and then we tell them about the shop, then all of a sudden, no, 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 no. That's that's not how things work. Yes, for many of us who are involved in arts, we are doing it because we have the privilege of living in places that are relatively peaceful. But even with Duchamp, as you'll see when I read the actual history behind it, the urinal was presented in 1917. And that was 2 years before the Treaty of Versailles, that ended World War I. And speaking about Versailles, just watched something with like people spending absurd amounts of money on homes, and there's this couple that became millionaires by selling timeshares, and in Florida they're rebuilding some parts of the Versailles palace, and it's another example of just how money is just wasted. It's not just in the public sector, in the government, in the state. This is a general thing humans do, and they just put the money and put it back out. Anyway. Also, just kind of showing there's nothing with just taste. It's not like, okay, these people are all of a sudden tasteful because they're like living in this place, and people in Afghanistan won't be able to get. Would these people be able to understand what the Duchamp is? The people who are rebuilding the Versailles? I don't know. Maybe they're completely okay people. I don't. But anyway, so coming back to this. If you're watching the video version of this, I'm going to put this on the screen now. It's a clip from the entire clip that I watched. And there was something that I picked up on, and somebody in the comments just put it in perfect words. He just said, at 31 seconds, the Afghanistan mission dies. And that 31 seconds, I think, first of all, I think it was dead long before these 31 seconds, if not on arrival, but this for sure did not help. And that's the point when the camera kind of pans over to some of the women looking at the screen. This looks like some kind of surprise in her face, and then zooms in on one of them, and she just shakes her head a couple of times, like, no, like. And yeah, here we are when I'm recording this, is months after that Kabul capitulation. And who has been fired? Who's been held accountable? What's the accounting of the whole thing? Do you understand how much money was spent? As I mentioned, people are rightfully upset about the military material, but do people understand how many other trillions of dollars were being spent? Zamari Ahmadi, who met his end after that drone hit him with those children, he was working with USAID. There was many other programs like this, many other people like this that were doing all sorts of activities in Afghanistan. Afghanistan. I know that sometimes it kind of ticks me off when people go with an accent when they say a certain word, but if that language has a version of it that's in English with an accent, Afghanistan. The Afghanistan or Afghanistan. Okay, so that happened. So there's trillions of dollars spent in there, and those are other things, in social programs. What is the effect of that? What is the lasting effect of that? Or was that just make work jobs for people in the West to make them feel better about the things that were going on? Gender studies programs and all these sorts of things going on, yet on the other aspect of it, like, oh, we have all this infrastructure in the United States of America that needs to be fixed while we're spending trillions of dollars on the other side of the world building their cultural thing. What is the purpose of some of these things? What do you think the purpose is of some of these things? Like, I'm trying to insert the understanding of the bubble that the literati live in. I live in a bubble of my own. I know I have an unusual lifestyle for other people. We all have our own little bubbles in different situations. But if you're just an average person living in New York City, just doing like you're making what 60,000, you just have like a 1-bedroom studio apartment. You're working just day to day, like check to check at a restaurant or something. You're going to be interacting with the regular populace on a regular basis. People coming into your restaurant. Also, you'll have to go wait in line at the hospital if you have something, at the clinic if you have something wrong. You're in public transport. So you're mingling. You're being broken out just by being around other people. You're going to have to rely on other people doing things in a certain way on a certain time on their plans for you to accomplish key things in your life. So even if you stay within listening to certain people, reading certain sources, only talking to certain friends, only doing certain activities in your leisure time, in your personal time, in the times that you choose, just doing other things, getting to those places is going to make you interact with other people. Now, the illiterati, when they do something, even going on vacation, if you're a regular person, you're going to regular people, talking to travel agents, or going online trying to find different things, dealing with just the regular. But if you have this illiterati group, you're in this top 1%, even top 10%, really in that kind of group. You're in those groups, so-called elites. They have a curated life. When they go somewhere, it's concierge. Concierge service, it's the way it is. If you go to a 5-star hotel all around the world, it's kind of the same thing. It's kind of these package deals. You go on vacation, it's a package deal. You go to somewhere else, someone's like, hey, this person's got a lot of money. I got to do things in there so I can get some of those resources. There's all these things that keeps them even in a closer bubble. There's a lot of news sources, a lot of entertainment sources, a lot of people trying to get that money and attention from these groups of people. So there's a lot of yes men, there's a lot of reinforcement of those bubbles. And that's what I can kind of see. So to them, they might have, oh yeah, I actually remember reading about Duchamp in art history and having some kind of appeal to it. It's still something that I still think about in my day-to-day life. But how many people actually think about this much? And I think a key thing is when you hear people speak about what Duchamp did, a lot of them talk about, some of them, I saw one in specific. When I was researching for this thing. I was like, okay, I'm not going to do this recording. I'm not going to do this thing. There was a thing where they were talking about how he changed art history. Not he changed art, but he changed art history. And then you look at something that's going on right now, something that might be changing art history as well, is something like the NFTs. Now, how accessible is the NFTs to just your regular average person? How much actual truth and value is there in NFTs? If we were still in Afghanistan right now, in that same course with the same woman or the same young lady that was shaking her head no, would they have some NFTs there? And then she'd also be shaking her head like, what are you guys doing with these NFTs? You're telling me you're spending millions of dollars on digital images and things like so. What is the point? Where is the point where somebody would think like, okay, in a program like this, there was an art historian that was involved in this. I'm assuming an art historian, if the lady who was in the class teaching, the woman who was in the class teaching is not an art historian herself, I think somebody would have been contacted with that program and have some kind of understanding of how it was received by the culture that Duchamp lived in at that time and how it was received in an Afghani culture that doesn't have the history of the West, doesn't have the history of Paris at that time. And maybe that was the lesson plan. Maybe they're saying, look, we weren't ready for it at that time, but then now it's kind of more accepted. Maybe you're not ready for certain things at this time. Maybe now some things will be kind of accepted in a few years from now. I don't know if that was the lesson plan there. And yeah, so to finish off now, thank you all for listening. I'm going to read this from Artsy, which is How Duchamp's Urinal Changed Art Forever. And this is a question to y'all out there. Are y'all familiar with the urinal? Do you think it's changed art? Do you have to be involved in the art field for it to change it? Or you just somehow, yeah, you like some things that are considered artistic and that has changed you somehow? I don't know. I don't know how you felt Duchamp's urinal in your life. I think the first time I heard of it was probably when I was in art class in high school, I would say, because I took some AP classes, but the AP classes we took in art were primarily actually just painting and drawing and perspective and things like that, actual creating art. And I didn't take a specific art history course until I was in college, but then I was also a graphic design undergrad major, so I was searching out this content. But most of y'all probably not aware of this actual history with Duchamp's urinal, but you probably have actually seen the urinal. If you live in the West, it's probably something that you're somewhat familiar with. On April 9th, 1917, just over 100 years ago, Marcel Duchamp achieved what was perhaps the most brilliant and absurd art event of the 20th century. The story is legend. Duchamp, wanting to submit an artwork to the Unjuried Society of Independent Artists Salon in New York, which claimed that they would accept any work of art so long as the artist paid the application fee, presented an upside-down urinal signed and dated with the appellation R. Mutt, 1917, and titled Fountain. The Society's board, faced with what must have seemed like a practical joke from an anonymous artist, rejected Foundation on the grounds that it was not a true work of art. Duchamp, who was a member of that board himself, resigned in protest. Is it really art? Artists and intellectuals surfaced on both sides of the issue, with perhaps the clearest explanation of Fountain's importance coming from an anonymous editorial believed to be written by the artist Beatrice Wood. It read, "Whether Mr. Mutt, with his own hands, made the fountain or not has no importance. He chose it. He took an ordinary article of life, placed it so that its useful significance disappeared under the new title and point of view, created a new thought for that object." Wood, who had followed Duchamp's work closely, recognized the groundbreaking power of the work. And Duchamp had for years championed the use of ready-mades, existing objects taken from real life and modified or recontextualized to function as works of art. The idea at hand, of art primarily as a concept rather than an object, is what would make Fountain arguably the most intellectually captivating and challenging art piece of the 20th century. What is a work of art? Who gets to decide, the artist or the critic? Can a work derive from an idea alone, or does it require the hand of a maker? These questions, strike at the core of our understanding of art itself. The influence of fountain. Over the past century, Duchamp's fountain has spawned myriad offspring and fueled numerous debates. How was the work conceived? What did the artist intend? There are even theories about whether Duchamp came up with the work at all. One account has him attributing the work to a female friend who sent him the urinal under the male pseudonym R. Mutt, which he then signed on it. Similarly, his famous quip that the only works of art America had contributed to the world were her plumbing and her bridges has been tentatively restored to its true author, our erstwhile Duchamp defender, Beatrice Wood. But to try and establish the true authorship of Fountain is exactly the kind of quixotic. Now, there's a Don Quixote. Why is it quixotic, but then it's not quixotic, like Quixote? Don Quixote is a kind of chaotic undertaking. It's quixotic. Quixotic. I think it's quixotic. So, but to try and establish the true authorship of the fountain is exactly the kind of quixotic undertaking that would have had Duchamp in stitches. Let's take a moment to recall that Monsieur Duchamp took a urinal, turned it upside down, and signed it Armut and submitted it to a salon. The pursuit of truth was decidedly not his quest. Rather, the unanswered questions that the fountain provoked are precisely what contributed to its conceptual underpinnings and its enduring and confounding legacy. Contemporary artists riff on Duchamp. Among the contemporary artists that have explored these questions by riffing on Duchamp's work is Mike Bidlow with his Fractured Fountain, not Duchamp Fountain of 1917. Work was in 2015. Made as an edition of 8 works that directly reference Duchamp's original, the work provides a perfect example of the way in which Duchamp explored everything that came before. Bidlow's version is a lovingly handcrafted porcelain copy that he then smashed, reconstituted, and cast in bronze. One recalls the cracks allowed in a classic Celadon pottery that were believed to enhance its aesthetic value, or the Roman practice of making marble copies of beautiful Greek bronzes that were slated to be melted down to make weaponry to further the empire. But here, both function in reverse. Bidlow's work follows Duchamp in depriving his object of both beauty and utility, furthering his challenges to artistic value. Cherie Levine's Fountain, Madonna, 1991, a bronze cast after the fountain, preserves more of the original while pushing its questions of authorship further. To what extent does it matter that a male artist chose the work in 1917? To what extent does it matter that a female artist chose to reproduce the work in bronze in 1991? What unites the artists that have riffed on Duchamp across the century is not only that they recognize the value of the questions it raises, but also that they moved forward with a sort of ingenuity and wit that Duchamp's legacy demands. Where is Duchamp's original? That doesn't mean that we have to take it seriously. It also doesn't mean that we can't revel in the unsolved mysteries-like scenario of the fountain's mysterious disappearance. To this day, no one knows what became of the original. We only have 17 copies that Duchamp created in the 1960s. Perhaps it was indeed one of his provocative female friends, the names Elsa von Freytag Loringhoven and Louise Norton have been suggested, who came up with the whole urinal idea in the first place. The nebulous origins of the fountain only add to its many layers and complexities. If the genesis and meaning of the fountain remained elusive, it has provided countless artists with something of a starting pistol for an idea of art as a concept in the 20th century, underscoring the fact that the definition of art itself is up for grabs. So that's it with the article, and as you can see, the definition that they had here that was given by his friend, what was his friend, Beatrice Wood, is close to the definition that I've had. Now, maybe you can say that that effect of the art, even though you personally don't understand it or might not have seen Duchamp's fountain or the urinal was flipped over to look like a fountain. It's a urinal when you go in the bathroom back in the day. It's like you pee on it, and now you flip it over, it's like a water fountain. But do the people, how many women in Afghanistan have actually been to a male's bathroom and know what the urinal looks like? And is there water fountains also there, so they could also get the water fountain? Maybe they were giving the background to that, and when they were giving the lesson, I don't know the gap. But I might not have actually, you might not have personally seen it. in your life. But since many of the artists whose work you might have enjoyed have seen it, maybe some of the ideas that Beatrice Wood was one of the first people to put together that concept that art was this kind of thing where it's like just changing the way you look at things, and then that enabled other people to just do things like change the way they look at certain things. And then from there, it gets other artists to think, okay, then I can also do certain things. And then now when I do those things, other people like to accept our things. Maybe if you've met somebody like a Banksy, who's one of the few artists who are still being able to maintain some level of anonymity in this current infosphere and things like that. Whereas even in the past back here, maybe Beatrice Wood and Duchamp were working on it together the whole time, where she kind of knew that it was him who actually posted, and that's why she went out and defended it. Or maybe she was just taking an actual stance on this is what she thought. I would prefer if we just taking a stance on that. But this is Marcel freaking Duchamp, though. So I mentioned how dropping bombs are not going to change a culture. They're not going to build a civilization. Dropping urinals, pictures of urinals doesn't do it either. As I mentioned, this was done in 1917. And yes, Duchamp had to leave, in part. I don't think he was going to be able to just live in France during that time and do this, because he was under occupation at that time. So he had to be in New York, but he was still French. It was still the West. It was still a part of this. There were different parts doing different things. Just like in Afghanistan, there was parts of Afghanistan that had things going on that were not going on in Kabul, where this lesson was probably being taught. And there is an aspect of this. So I think if you look back and you try to find the underpinnings of what makes a society more geared towards human flourishing, towards more peaceful ways of dealing with things, a more rule of law that is just and something that is people can understand. I'm going to have some level of safety, some level of security, some level of reliability of these institutions to exist in this place, because we're coming together as a community, as a society, for the positives that this kind of stability maintains. And I think once you get to that point, you'll have people within that community, within that society, within that area that will create their own cultural version of arts coming out of that. I've had some personal experience with that. Being born in France, and I moved to Kenya, then I moved to the United States of America, then I moved to Italy, and I've been back in Kenya and the United States of America, and seeing how arts are treated in the different kinds of places. I had a background in animation, and I said, okay, in Italy, even in a place like Italy, animation was more for kids. In Kenya, animation was non-existent. In the United States of America, animation was more of a bigger industry, but it was done in a different kind of way. It wasn't like anime. Then I was also very familiar with like the Japan animation and things like that in that industry there. With the comics industry, how it's different in the United States of America versus the manga industry there. Then I was thinking, okay, in Kenya it's non-existent, but it's coming up now. In the last 10, 20 years that I've been watching, the last 10 years specifically that I've been watching the things happening in Kenya, seeing it grow, seeing Kenyan artists come up with their own particular unique styles in animation, in painting, some video games coming out, plays coming out, musicians and things like this. So that's developing due to the stability in the actual country. I don't know how many people have been taught about Duchamp's urinal. It hasn't come from first being occupied by the West and then coming in and doing these things. There had to be some level of stability, I think, within the community, within the culture, from within the community and the culture and those structures within that community and culture evolving to a point where they create some level of stability and some level of excess resources, even if it's just excess time for somebody to think what, and then do it because of the what, versus I have to do this because I have to. If you're constantly on the edge of just trying to maintain your basic bodily functions, your basic societal, cultural functions, you're not going to have time to create art, let alone engage in these sorts of social experiments, questioning of what something as nebulous as art is by taking a urinal and then turning it into this fountain type of thing. Now that's it for this one, and this is in part of the Perception Matters series, and also the Art is a Language of Life series. Perception Matters, when I'm talking about different ways people perceive different things, and of course Art is a Language of Life is just focusing on art-related things. There's a lot of other content I have on art-related things, and I'm going to be focusing on making a lot more things like that. If you've been watching the video version on the screen, it's probably going to be 2 different things on there. Anyone But K is another series that I'm doing where I'm like, okay, that shirt of Che Guevara, it's a very aesthetic kind of design of this shirt. But at the same point, Che Guevara is a garbage human being. So I think most of the people who wear it don't really know how garbage of a human being that Che Guevara is. but at the same point, it's a really aesthetic design. So art can appeal to people without them actually knowing what that art is. You don't have to know the art, know the meaning behind, or the original artist was creating something to intend a certain way. It doesn't mean it's going to end up that way for everybody else. So I'll probably do a speed drawing of Duchamp himself, Marcel Duchamp himself, and I think I'll also include, this is the first time I'm going off of the general template, when go with the actual urinal itself in that same kind of aesthetic design. So there's links somewhere below wherever you listen to this to a merchandise store where you can help support the content that I'm making. I'm still doing other things. I create art. I'm a bit of an artist. So those are the things that I'm focusing on, but the more support that I get from y'all out there, guys, gals, and everything else in between, the more I'll be focusing on creating content like this. If you do appreciate it, that's one way you can support. There's also donations and other things. Another thing you'll find on there sometimes is just some quotes, and one of the ones that I have on that store is the Sowell 3, and these are 3 questions that economist Thomas Sowell, all around just great, admirable guy. He's also on the Anyone But K series, but he has these 3 questions that he asks people on the political left about economical issues, economics. But I think econ is something that applies to other parts of life, and I like applying those 3 questions to other things. The 3 questions are compared to what, at what cost, and what solid proof do you have? And I shall apply that to just this Duchamp being presented to this Afghan group in this kind of situation. So compared to what? What were you presenting this urinal to them? What do you think they were going to be able to compare the background of this urinal? What is similar about that culture and society at the point and time that it is and the peoples that were there, and then think, yeah, they're going to get this. This is something worthwhile. Was it something where you're just saying, okay, look, even our top artists used to question this back then when it was presented to them, so don't be so surprised that you're questioning some things about the West. What was the actual thing that they're thinking of doing there? And then at what cost? By the time that they were spending time teaching them these things, presenting these things, could they have been doing more practical things? Were they lessons or maybe the positives of peaceful parenting, for example? Were they things like that, where it's like, okay, the peaceful parenting, if you do this, then your kids are going to be raised in a certain way, and then they'll be able to deal with certain things in the better way? Or you're like, no, that's not something. That's something cultural. That's something that fits their culture. And then it's just the practical cost, like, trillions of dollars. Those trillions of dollars that were spent doing this, spending on this, getting these people over there to teach them this content, keep the location secure. What was the actual cost that we're doing? What was the cost-benefit analysis that went there? And last, what solid proof do you have? What solid proof did they have that this was going to be effective? Have they done some kind of study where they've said, okay, the average person in New York, where Duchamp presented this, or the average person in France, where Duchamp was born, we take the average person who's not really involved in arts. I don't know. Like I said, these people might have been specifically artists. They might have been the few Afghan artists that they found in those areas that decided to take this class and apply for this course, and then that's why they were being taught. But have you actually learned something about the schooling indoctrination complex going on in the United States of America that said if you teach people art history, they somehow have better outcomes, so it's worthwhile to actually do this? What was the solid proof that went behind saying this is a reason that compared to these other things, we're not going to do that, we're going to do Duchamp? Even Duchamp in specific, then at what cost? Compared to those things, we have solid proof, so it's good to be, yes, we need millions of dollars to get this teacher over here to be teaching these people these things. What was the solid proof that they had that was going to actually work? And I think you'll find there was little to nothing. Maybe there was, maybe there is, maybe I'm completely wrong. Let me know about this. This was me talking about Marcel frigging Duchamp and showing off a urinal to Afghan women, and that woman just shaking her head. And that's it. Goodbye.